Major funding for these broadcasts has been provided by grants from New York Community Bank, Capital One Bank, Eastern Consolidated, M&T Bank, Sterling National Bank, Meridian Capital Group, Customers Bank, Aerial Property Advisors, Perfect Building Maintenance. Additional funding has been provided by AKA Hotels, Corman Communities, AmTrust Title Insurance Company, AVR Realty Company, Avison Young, Bank of America, Merrill Lynch, Bank Leumi USA, Briarwood Organization, CBRE, Chase Commercial Term Lending, Chase Mortgage Lending, Citizens Bank, Cohen Equities, Colliers International NYC, Collins Building Services, Connect One Bank, CPEX Real Estate Services, Dime Community Bank, Douglaston Development, Levine Builders, Flushing Bank, Friedman LLP, Genova Burns, Handro Properties, Handler Real Estate Organization, HAP Investments, Hodges Ward Elliott Inc., Investors Bank, James D. Kuhn Real Estate Center at Syracuse University, Kilroy Architectural Windows, Madison Realty Capital, Matone Group, Mercantile Bank, New Banks, Newmark Grubb Knight Frank, Optimum Window Manufacturing Corp., People's United Bank, Polsonelli, Rosewood Realty Services, SJP Properties, Stonehenge Partners, TD Bank, Terra CRG, the Knackle Group at Cushman & Wakefield, Maring-Goff Family Foundation, the Moynihan Group, and these friends.
She's from Germany, born, Israel, Brooklyn. Now the psychologist will continue on her story about children of survivors and her own life. Eva Fogelman, Part 2. So it's this gathering that Yitz Greenberg puts together in
1979.
It's 1979. So what happens after the gathering?
Well, after the gathering, I am in graduate school at the Graduate Center of City University of New York.
You moved back to New York.
I moved back to New York, and I came to study here with Dr. Stephen P. Cohen and also with Stanley Milgram. So
Right.
I was studying social and personality psychology. And I was still continuing, I continued to do groups for children of survivors, and I continued to do research on the psychological impact of the Holocaust. In 1981, Stephen P. Cohen is asked by the American Jewish Committee to head up a research project on the altruistic personality.
The altruistic personality of a survivor or of the rescuers.
Of the rescuers, right?
Correct.
Trying to see whether the altruistic personality is the opposite of the authoritarian personality. This was the late John Slauson, who had originally commissioned the authoritarian personality study in the 1940s in the United States. There was tremendous fear that what happened in Germany is going to happen here. And so now he wanted to see, is there such a thing as an altruistic personality? And Stephen P. Cohen was very busy doing a study on images in conflict, on the Middle East conflict. And so because I was working on research related to the Holocaust, he gave me the project. And in 1981, also was a very special year in that the World Gathering of Holocaust Survivors took place in Jerusalem, which I was one of the organizers. We had a whole day devoted us to children of Holocaust survivors. There were more than 1,000 children of survivors. And it is that event that gave Holocaust survivors back their dignity. We have to remember...
What do you mean it gave back their dignity?
Well, we have to remember that Holocaust survivors, when they came to the United States, they were shunned. They were seen as victims. People thought of them as, why did you go to the slaughter like sheep? And some of the articles, the early articles that were written, is that the best people died. Those who survived must have done something devious in order to survive. And so all of a sudden, Holocaust survivors are being seen not as victims, but as survivors. And that made a tremendous difference.
What happens then?
Then I got involved in the International Network of Children of Jewish Holocaust Survivors, where we would have regular meetings, and we also had some major conferences that took place, but in addition to all my activities, my political activities, I then began my research on the rescuers. So you have to remember, in 1981, when you went to Yad Vashem, that honors those non-Jews who risked their lives to save Jews, you didn't have a computer list of who were the rescuers. Basically, you had folders. And so I spent some time going through the folders, trying to take a look if I can find some rescuers who live in the United States. At the gathering, I also gave out questionnaires to survivors if they had any rescuers. And from then on, I used a snowball method to try to find these rescuers. And today, Yad Vashem has honored about 25,000 rescuers, and there are several books.
So how does the PBS documentary come out in 1984?
Sure.
Or Breaking the Silence, the generation after the Holocaust?
One of the groups that I was leading in Boston with Henry Grunbaum became the subject for the documentary Breaking the Silence,
Which
the generation.
You were the executive producer and you wrote.
I was the co-producer
Right.
and the writer. We started filming this in 1978. We went to every Jewish organization. No Jewish organization gave us any money. They said, oh, this is just going to be something, for the families to watch. It's never, going to get to PBS or anything. And lo and behold, the whole scene changed by the time the film was ready in 1984.
Other people don't fully understand it the way we do because their parents didn't suffer as our parents did.
It's really hard, I think, for people outside of the experience to sort of accept the horror that these living, normal people have really been through the worst. They've really seen hell and come back.
While growing up, we, the children of Nazi Holocaust survivors, heard bits and pieces about our parents' shattered lives. Even now, especially around holidays, our mothers and fathers remember all those relatives who are no longer here to celebrate with us as they did in Europe. Where they went to school, participated in sports, politics, and tried to make a living. Accelerating harassments of Jews were a beginning of the final solution. Some of our parents escaped or joined the resistance. Others hid or tried to disguise their identities. But unfortunately, most were rounded up and deported to ghettos and concentration camps.
Who was the benefactor?
We got money from a Dutch foundation, the Van American Foundation, that gives money to mental health projects. And at the end, we also got money to do a study guide from the National Foundation for Jewish Culture.
Then it's 1986, right?
1994.
Okay, 1994. But during that period of time, you get your PhD at the Graduate
Right, so
Center.
I interviewed I interviewed more than 100 rescuers for my doctoral dissertation, which was why did non-Jews risk their lives to save Jews during the Holocaust, and it's a social psychological study. While I was in graduate school, Stephen P. Cohen had gone on to be head of the CRB Foundation. That's the Charles Bronfman Foundation. And a Rabbi Harold Schulweis contacted him, said, I've always wanted to have a foundation for the rescuers to give them more recognition in the United States and to try to see how we can help them. And so Steve Cohen said, well, why don't you contact Eva Fogelman? And in 1986, I was driving down the Pacific Coast interviewing rescuers from San Francisco to Los Angeles, and I met Rabbi Harold Schulweis, and we put together this foundation, which I ran out of my office for about a year, and then I graduated in 1987, and we went around to all Jewish organizations.
And when did the foundation become part of
1987. So what happened is, so Abe Foxman said, I'm going to give you money and an office, and you can have your foundation.
Part of the Anti-Defamation League.
Correct. And so that's how the foundation started, and then the foundation in its heyday was supporting 1,600 rescuers in about 26 different countries. And we also, in the initial days of the foundation, we got rescuers to speak. We had lunches for them, and we sent them out to speak all over the United States. You have to realize that these non-Jews who risked their lives did not want to be seen as heroes. They didn't want to brag or talk about their experiences. It was only after my interviews with them and my trying to convince them that what they have to say is going to make a difference in young people's lives in terms of seeing what a hero is about, that they then decided, okay, I'm going to go out and speak.
I mean, during this period of time, in addition to doing this work with children of Holocaust survivors and rescuers, you were in private practice.
At that time, I had a very small private practice.
But you were spending time with the foundation.
Correct.
So it's 1994, right?
Right. So I left the foundation, I think, around 1991, 92. And I then started to build up my private practice.
And then you come out with
And then I came out with my book on
Conscience and Courage, Rescuers of the Jews During the Holocaust. The book is nominated for a Pulitzer Prize, subsequently translated into how many languages?
Just German and Czech.
Which we have copies of.
Yeah, the awful thing is when we sent it to France, they said, we already saw Schindler's List. We don't need a book on the rescuers.
So let's talk about the rescuers, because I had the opportunity this past weekend to read the book.
Thank you.
Okay, and so it tells me that your real name was Fogelman.
Right.
The reason that you initially wrote it was because of your father, who was rescued by people, especially with the Russian baker, the baker who saved his life. People know about rescuers, you know, Wallenberg, Schindler. They know about that, but in the book, you've interviewed about 240 people that you talk about.
Yeah.
And there are certain personalities or characteristics of a rescuer, okay? And you've identified them and you've spoken around the world about it. What is the identity? You talk about many of the rescuers had a great family life. They were nurtured by their parents.
Yes.
And then you said some of the rescuers, in addition to that, believed that it was written in the Bible, since the Jews created the Old Testament before the New Testament over there. So what was the characteristic of why someone became a rescuer?
Right. So you have several different things. One is their personality. The other is their socialization. And the other is the situation that created the particular motivation. So you have three things interacting together. So in terms of their socialization, the thing that stands out the most is that they learned a tolerance and acceptance of people who are different. So that means in their house, people from different religions might have come into the house. and they never spoke badly about somebody who was different from them. Also, they had an altruistic role model. So in about 85% of these families, there was somebody who was involved in helping activities, and they too got involved in the helping. You have to remember, many of the rescuers grew up during World War I, when many of the men were away. So women would be very involved in soup kitchens, helping other women who are pregnant, and they got their children involved in the rescue activity. Many of these children experienced some kind of a loss when they were 3 years old, whether they had to move, whether somebody, got sick and died. And again, they had somebody who was very loving and took care of them. We also have to remember, in those days in Europe, corporal punishment was the way that parents disciplined their children. In the rescuing families, if they did something wrong, things were explained to them rather than giving them corporal punishment for doing the wrong thing.
But why'd somebody possibly protect their lives? I mean, if it was some of the books you talked about, the food, if they gave away a piece of food, somebody could have been murdered.
Right.
Of them, okay.
Well,
some of them had sexual relationships with Germans to save people's lives. Okay.
Yes.
The stories are numerous. That people hear about. But what are the three major characteristics that you would identify?
You can't talk about it in that way. You have to talk about their different motivations. So some people were motivated because it was the right thing to do. They couldn't live with themselves if they let these people go. So morality comes either from religious morality, or just it's the right thing to do, a cognitive thing, or an emotional sense of pity and compassion. So then you have a relationship. You had a relationship you worked with a Jew. You went to school with a Jew. Your dentist was Jewish. Your doctor was Jewish. So that it was that relationship. Or you were the nanny of a child, and this child is going to, could you imagine you're a nanny of a child, and this child is going to die? What are you going to do? Nannies, they're not just workers. They are very committed to it's as if it's their own children.
But, let's identify, you identify many rescuers, and some of them wanted their names to be named, and some of them did not, so you use Hannah H. or something like that as opposed to that. Because I read some article that people said Schindler's List was a terrible movie. Somebody wrote this article over there, not your way. Why did Schindler... What really motivated him?
Well, first of all, Schindler was a Shabbos goy for Jews, his next door neighbors. So he did have a special kind of feeling for Jews. He would go and turn on the lights for them on the Sabbath, or fix their oven, and they would give him candy. So he had this personal relationship. But Schindler then has a transforming experience. And when he sees the liquidation of the Krakow ghetto, and he sees how the Jews are being herded away, and some of them just shot on the way, it is that particular transforming moment. He says, I have to do something. He begins to see the Jews like human beings just like himself. So that what the rescuers had is, the rescuers had the ability not to be co-opted by all the Nazi propaganda that the Jews are vermin, that the Jews are the cause of all the economic ills, that the Jews spread diseases.
That's Schindler. Wallenberg. Why'd he save 3,000?
People think that Wallenberg indeed had some Jewish relatives in his very distant past, and he lived in Israel, and I should say Palestine, and he studied in Palestine, and so again he had a close relationship to seeing the Jews as human beings just like himself.
And let's talk about the rescuers, because people don't really know truly about this association, because myself, before I read the book, I knew about the rescuers, but I didn't understand that the rescuers are receiving stipends.
my foundation, the Jewish Foundation for Christian Rescuers, which is today the Jewish Foundation for the Righteous, was a foundation that was started to give back, akarat atov, the recognition of goodness. And so you have many rescuers living in dire poverty. You had many rescuers who couldn't afford their medication, rescuers who, couldn't afford to get themselves clothes.
And where do these funds come from?
These funds were raised by philanthropists.
Okay, but no reparations from Germany or anything?
No, there are no reparations from Germany for the rescue. This was all money that was raised by philanthropists.
But let's talk about the memorials and at Yad Vashem for rescuers and at the Holocaust Memorial in
Sure.
Washington.
So when Yad Vashem, Israel's Holocaust Research Center and Museum, was founded in 1953. Ben-Gurion said, in addition to remembering what happened to the Jews during the Holocaust, we are also going to remember those non-Jews who risked their lives to save Jews without any monetary or other reward. And a committee was formed to find those people. And, as a rescuer, you can't write Yad Vashem and say, I saved these Jews. People have to, people who were witnesses or the survivors themselves have to send in testimonies, and then a committee decides on them.
So how many people have been recognized?
There are now 25,000 non-Jews who have been recognized.
So that's Yad Vashem.
Right.
Let's talk about the Holocaust Memorial in Washington.
The Holocaust Memorial in Washington was commissioned by President Carter, and Elie Wiesel was the chairman, and I have been on the committee as a second-generation advisor since Elie was beginning to conceive the idea. It is not a museum that recognizes the rescuers. Only Yad Vashem in Israel does that.
And what about the association the U.S. association the Society for the Righteous in America? People get honored each year, the righteous Gentiles?
No, not in the United States. That only Israel does that. So, for example, let's say if there's a rescuer who lives in China, let's say, and so the Israeli embassy in China will have a ceremony to honor them if they can't come to Israel. But most of the ceremonies are done at Yad Vashem.
In the book, talks about some of these rescuers were persecuted later on, like Schindler. In Israel, he was accepted. In Germany, they wanted to castrate him.
It was very difficult for rescuers, particularly in the small towns in Poland and the Ukraine. If the non-Jews in the town found out that they had rescued Jews, they tortured them after the war. They made their life miserable. Some of them had to move to another small town where nobody knew them.
In addition to the book over there, you have a new book coming out, Children in the Holocaust and Its Aftermath. Tell me about that new book.
Sure. In 1984, I got involved with Dr. Judith Kestenberg and Milton Kestenberg, who were studying the persecution of children during the Holocaust. And this is a whole other area of my research and political activities that I have been very
And now it's part of the book over here, Children During the Nazi Regime, that you edited with Judith Kestenberg.
Correct. So again, we interviewed more than 1,500 children in various European countries, in Australia, in Canada, the United States, South America. We got other mental health professionals to do interviews. And also what's interesting about the collection we have, which is now at Hebrew University in the Oral History Department, and will soon be in the Israeli National Library.
How do we keep the the message alive after the survivors are, the survivors, many of them, the rescuers there aren't that many left, okay, based on their age. And then the survivors are also getting older. What's the next step in the promulgation of keeping all this?
Well, right now we still have Holocaust child survivors who are alive, and who have been silenced all these years because people say children don't remember and they have no story to tell. Those who are now, who were children, that's those who were 13 or under at the start of persecution, are doing much more speaking now. The Shoah Foundation, that's Spielberg's foundation, is now developing a method of holograms in which they will have an image of a survivor. They're asking that survivor as many questions as they can now, so that when the hologram comes into a classroom, say 30 years from now, any question that is asked, that survivor will be able to ask the question. We have many, the interviews that we have can be used educationally. The interviews that have been done by the Spielberg Foundation, by the Fortunow Foundation at Yale. There are lots of other.
So let's talk about children. You have a son, right?
Yes.
So tell me about your son and tell me about your husband.
My husband is he's a writer, he is a political thinker, he's very involved in the cultural world, so he is a real polymath. And my son seems like a polymath as well. They're both very
Where is he going
musical.
to school right now?
My son is at Northwestern. He's very involved in interreligious activities, in animal rights, in alternative ways to bring peace to the Middle East. He's studying Arabic. And when all the restrictions against immigrations were happening with the Trump administration, he calls me up. He's at the airport to try to protest the ban against immigrants, and he says to me, remember the book you wrote about the rescuers? Well, we may have to save some ourselves this time.
Tell me about your sister, your baby sister.
My sister is a psychiatric social worker and psychoanalytic psychotherapy. She is half retired now after working for 30 years at a day program for emotionally disturbed individuals, where she set up amazing programs using film therapy and book therapy and exercise therapy for day people. She is now a supervisor for social work students at Smith and has a private practice.
So the good part is, thank God that your parents survived the Holocaust. Thank God that you went to Israel and came to America. And thank God that you've been very involved to tell the stories and to continue to tell the stories. And thanks for being here today.
And thank you for having me.